Hello, it's Dr. Kourting, also of the Kourting Happiness podcast. Have you checked out our happiness library? It's a carefully curated library with books that I highly recommend that are a must for your happiness library. Go to drkourtneyalston.com/happiness library. That's drkourtneyalston.com/happiness library. The authors you will hear on the podcast can also be found in our happiness library. You can also purchase their books on our site. On top of that, your purchase also helps this podcast and the mission of Kourting Happiness. Let's spread happiness and the word. Check out books on the Kourting Happiness library. It will not only change your life, but it can also help you with your next chapter too. Let's get back to the podcast. Welcome to the Kourting Happiness podcast. This is a space where self-care becomes part of your day. A space where you learn evidence-based strategies to help your life, share it with those you love, and cultivate well-being at work. I'm your host, Dr. Kourting Alston. I'm a former news director, television reporter turned happiness scholar, TEDx speaker, and transformational trainer. I also understand hardships. While working my dream job in television, I lived a nightmare suddenly becoming a young widow after 86 days of marriage. I became committed to learning more about resilience, healing, and happiness. This is how I discovered my area of research, which is positive psychology. Now I'm living my calling of training individuals and organizations on happiness. And my new chapter begins with being happily engaged. The Kourting and Kourting Happiness is about a true courtship. I like to say commitment with happiness. The K in Kourting stands for the vulnerability of sharing my story, inspirational interviews with phenomenal people, the infusion of positive psychology, and so much more. You'll learn how to commit to your well-being one episode at a time. I hope you subscribe and share. So, are you ready? Let's get started. Welcome to episode 60. I'm Dr. Kourting Alston. I'm so happy that you're here. We have a special guest. She is a psychotherapist, podcaster, and published author. Lisa Tahir is the founder of Psychoastrology. Her book is endorsed by His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, and she is the author of The Chiron Effect, Healing Our Core Wounds Through Astrology, Empathy, and Self-Forgiveness. Her work will help you truly transform yourself as it relates to psychology, spirituality, and also taking personal responsibility. She's also the host of a great podcast. You have to listen to it called All Things Therapy. And her guests include influential spiritual and thought leaders such as Marianne Williamson, Dr. John Gray, and so much more. She will help you shine and see the star in you through healing. I loved every moment of this transformative conversation with Lisa. And I know you will too. So let's dive in. Lisa, first off, thank you so much for being here on the Kourting Happiness podcast. I have been looking forward to this conversation with you ever since you came into my inbox. And I'm so super excited and grateful for that. And I love the work that you're doing and the work in terms of from your book to your podcast to also your multiple interviews and your articles and like Psychology Today. The list goes on and on. But I want to focus in on your book right now and to talk about the dynamics of it. One of the things that I loved is how truly transformative it is and how you are talking about astrology and empathy and self-forgiveness, which I'm looking forward to talking about a little bit later. But you talk about the Chiron effect. And you have a chapter where it specifically talks about why Chiron. So let's start our conversation with talking about why Chiron and why is it so important in terms of the dynamic as it relates to transformation?
Absolutely. And Dr. Courtney, first, I want to thank you for having me on Courting Happiness podcast. This is an honor and a delight. I love your energy. As
Thank
I
you.
said when we were just privately on the call. And, I would love to start there because for me, as a licensed therapist for over 20 years, my entry into Chiron, which is Chiron, was a discovery for myself when I was asking the question of the universe, of myself, how do I help my clients move beyond the story of their wounding? And even in my own personal healing journey, being a client in therapy for numerous years, doing my own work, I noticed I would go back to these memories from so long ago, yet they would still generate emotion that didn't feel good. And I thought, I want to bring my clients forward, not backwards into that pain, and just kind of seeking another paradigm, another perspective in meditation. And that's when I was given in a thought Chiron, which I started to research after it kept coming up in my mind for a number of weeks. I had remembered Chiron as the archetype that Carl Jung writes about in the archetypes, the wounded healer. That was a reference from grad school days. It didn't feel that powerful, to be honest, Dr. Courtney, in the moment. But once the universe gets a hold of you and wants you to research something, I felt that curiosity to learn more. And that's where I discovered Chiron is an astrological placement in our birth chart, just like you might know your sun sign. And what is your sun sign, Dr. Courtney?
Well, I was born in March,
January. Oh gosh. So that's
so I'm a
you're
Pisces.
Pisces. Okay.
Hmm.
So yeah, your sun sign. I'm a Gemini, yet this Chiron sign became very interesting to me because I learned we know from psychology and spirituality and metaphysics that our thoughts generate what we believe to be true about ourselves, about the life that we're going to live. We can't go beyond our largest limiting belief. That's kind of like the glass ceiling, and it's different for everyone. So I started to learn that this Chiron placement speaks to an area of vulnerability up to and including a core wounding. And it might be self esteem that's low, a lack of confidence. It might manifest in not addressing your physical health adequately. It might show up as you're not empathetically attuned to, meaning people misunderstand you, they misperceive you, you don't feel heard or seen accurately. And we start to generate all of these beliefs about ourselves and about life. And then that dictates our actions, our people, places, and things that we habituate. And that's the Chiron effect, our frequency, our daily activities, our relationships. And again, they're within this orbit, this range of what we believe is true. And I learned that by changing our thoughts, by understanding where we feel vulnerable, instead of hiding that from ourselves and others, feeling embarrassed or shame, it's like, let's look at this in the light and transform it through affirmation, through taking personal responsibility and psychology.
I love that. I love that in terms of alignment, in terms of energy, right?
Yes.
I in terms of thinking
Yes.
about your thoughts, as you mentioned earlier, in terms of because that rumination and going over and over and over again, right? It really does harm in terms of our thought pattern. What do you say to an individual who is, and I love how you shared it in terms of that narrative, right? Because that story that you may tell yourself, what are the
Yes.
first steps that you offer in terms of having that person kind of literally change their narrative?
Sure, that's a really great question, Dr. Courtney. And I invite the reader in to this perspective, this conversation with themselves. I invite you to get a candle, get a notebook that you'll use, say, take 20 minutes per reading session, because I walk you through some of my memories to help you tap into your own memories of times you both felt really good and times that were wounding and hurtful to start making some new meaning. And I noticed behind you, you even have the choose happy. And it really is our choice. And I think to choose happiness, we hear that a lot, that suffering is optional, these kind of memes, these quotes. And I think to really embrace choosing our thoughts, choosing our emotional state of being, we do have to revisit or visit for the first time some of the experiences that were hurtful and caused us to create meanings about ourselves that don't serve. And I don't know that we were told enough, Dr. Courtney, that how wonderful we are, how magnificent we are, how perfect we are, regardless of what has happened to us, because these are all lessons and gifts to help us, I believe, learn to be more empathetic and self forgiving. And that's where that conversation around self forgiveness became a part of my work and my book. I think that when we're taught about forgiveness, it's often in the perspective of forgiving others, but we really have to include ourselves first. And I wonder what you think about that, even.
You know, it's so interesting that you say that because I really treasure forgiveness and the really the also the research behind forgiveness. I often talk about Worthington in terms of the work that he's done in that area, in terms of the value of forgiveness. And it's interesting that you share that because you know I've learned how much of a great gift it is in terms of when you're thinking about how you need to forgive another person, but then also how incredibly transformative it can be in terms of forgiving yourself, practicing
Yes.
self-compassion as it relates to yourself. So, you know, you're absolutely right in terms of the value of self-forgiveness. But I'm curious because I cannot wait to talk more and more about the transformational power of self-forgiveness and all things as relates to empathy, because I think that is also another life-changing dynamic.
Yes.
I'm curious because when we talk about suffering,
Yeah.
and when we talk about kind of I often tell people it's not, I don't like to use the term going through, I like to use the term growing through,
Oh, I love that.
because it's
Yeah,
talking about the process, right? And
it
so
is.
as a person is kind of growing through levels of suffering in terms of healing, how would you describe healing? How do you what does healing mean to you? Because I think that's a great another initiative to start,
Mm.
because those someone who's listening may have one interpretation of what healing is, and now they can kind of almost feel a level of reassurance of going, oh, okay, I am okay. you
No,
know
that's such a powerful question, Dr. Courtney, because I think it could be answered in so many different ways,
Mhm.
as I hear you saying. And for me, when I feel healed, when I see my clients really in that transformative place in their own lives, it's when we're triggered, and that trigger, which is an energetic attachment, kind of like an invisible landmine emotionally,
Mhm.
that one might step on in conversation, in relationship. It brings up something that causes you to have a reaction that I teach in my book to be, to, instead of being reactive, to be responsive, to slow down. And so I feel like I know that healing has happened when someone might say something, do something that would have triggered for me to feel rejected or unworthy or unimportant. And I recognize it in the moment. Wow, this is something that was painful at one point in my life. And I might feel a little twinge. I might feel like, ooh, ouch. Yet I really catch it in that moment, and it doesn't send me to the place of negating myself, of feeling unworthy, of letting someone else's actions influence who I believe I am. And I'm not reactive. I don't blast them with a rude text or need to tell them that they're wrong and I'm right, which I certainly have done, trust you me, in the past. And it never went well.
I will say I resemble that remark. Yes.
Right, right.
Yes.
And so I think you really see your healing happening when you're able to be in some of the conversations and relationships, and you feel you don't feel those deep pain points, that you're able to recognize and then have empathy for that person, because it's wounded people that wound others, as we've heard. And I think when someone wounds you, it's really their own call for love. And when we can step beyond or step through our own disappointment, our own hurt, and be able to send them love, even in a text or a call or remotely through meditation, through prayer, that's when you really know you have been healed. You are healed, because you're able to stay in that place of unconditional love, which is loving regardless of the condition.
I love that. Loving regardless of the condition. And I also love what you shared in terms of trigger, it being what do you say, invisible landmine.
Yes.
Right? And
Yes.
it's that is so powerful when you think about it because triggers they feel just as explosive,
Yeah.
right? As
Yeah.
that invisible landmine. And I love that you shared it in terms of letting us understand what that even looks like, but then also what it can feel like. When you mentioned empathy,
Mhm.
and when wounded people hurt other people, or I've always heard that term, when hurt people, right?
Yes. Yes.
How can an individual practice like a heightened level of empathy when you're dealing with that person that is, boy, that is setting your landmine and it's going off? Like, you're right.
Yes.
How do you go about, practicing that heightened level of empathy?
It takes a real skill set to step back from the moment through self awareness and recognize, wow, this hit upon something within me, and definitely give yourself the time to cry your tears. Even if you're angry, write that in a journal entry, burn it in your sink, versus having to confront that person initially, I suggest, because there's so much information there for you about yourself. I've learned these triggers reveal unhealed places within us. And it doesn't mean that person's right or what they did was okay. That's different. That's a separate issue. But first, for yourself, to truly heal that part of you so that you're not activated in that negative way anymore. It takes the self-awareness to pause and look at what this brought up, because I guarantee you it brings up something that hasn't been adequately addressed or soothed within you. And once you do that first for yourself, I would suggest then look at what needs to be done in this relationship or with this person, because you don't know if someone's able to receive, your love, or even your, hey, that hurt me, I'm wondering if you're okay, this is really unlike you to say something like that. And some people might be in the place to receive it and say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, thank you for your compassion. And others might not. But the point is how you choose to respond, I think, versus how they perceive your response. So it's really taking a lot of self accountability and awareness.
I love that in terms of understanding that you have a choice, right? Because I think sometimes when we are triggered, you can almost feel like where it might be feeling trapped or feeling,
Yeah.
you want to like, you literally want to be explosive. But I
Yes.
love that you share the value of the choice in it. As I'm talking to Lisa, is I see her beautiful cat who is who's trying to make I'm assuming, is it a her? Is it a female
It's a girl.
cat?
Oh, she loves the movie. She would love to be in your husband's movies on TV. She definitely loves the spotlight.
Because and I know that because I think she's a calico. That's why
She is.
because
Yes.
calicos are female. My
Yeah.
my cat was a calico. Her name was
Oh,
Dynasty, and
oh,
and
that's a good name.
so I was I'm like looking at this beautiful cat just in and out, just trying to communicate to doc to Lisa to me. So
Yes.
Lisa, another thing, I said ooh when you talked. I'm not sure if you saw me because I am very expressive, and and you mentioned taking it and burning it in the sink.
Yes.
I have to hear that. Like, tell me about this practice because I'm already visualizing my sink, and in terms of what that practice looks like, in terms of as you mentioned, take it and maybe burn it in the sink. Well, tell
Yes.
us a little bit
It
more about that.
absolutely, Dr. Courtney. For me, it's been a powerful experience and expression when I felt hurt, when I felt angry, to write it from your gut, what you would want to tell that person, not politely, just really from your gut, to fully express instead of repress your own emotional reactions. Because this isn't about repressing yourself or being inauthentic. It's being authentic in a way that doesn't damage things more. than what they already feel or have been. So it's journaling, writing out exactly what you want to say in graphic detail as many times as you need to. And then I bring it to my sink, often a full moon or a new moon, and burn it. And you see it go up in flames in the sink. It's safe. And it really does something. It's cathartic. And I've experienced that. My clients have, like, you see it go up in smoke and flames. And you can imagine you're releasing that anger. You're releasing this pain. You're literally burning it away, transmuting it. And I often feel peace after, and as do my clients. And so I would encourage anyone to try this before you sit down and have the conversation with someone that's triggered you.
Yeah, I love that.
Thank you.
It has it's so powerful in terms of a visual nature,
Yeah.
and I love that you mentioned you'd speak literally from your gut, right?
Yes.
It's like, in other words, don't hold back,
No.
write it authentically,
Yes.
just make sure you just get it out, and then, going to your sink in terms of this, almost feel like it's almost like a ceremony in terms
It
of
is.
just
It
letting
is.
it go. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. When
Thank
you
you.
said that, I couldn't help. I was like, I have to learn more about the dynamics as relates to the sink in terms of letting go. So as now we have all these great resources in terms of the value of our energy and the value of astrology, the value of empathy, right? Let's talk more about the whole astrological dynamic to it all. How can that serve us as it relates to our healing?
Sure. Well, I call this psychoastrology, and I trademarked that word to demarcate where our personal astrology, particularly the placement of Chiron, meets your personal psychology, where you've come from, the family you grew up in, the beliefs you've adopted, the paradigm, the way that you look at life through the lens of your own experience. And it's by combining those two things that life it became just more vivid in a way that I felt like, okay, I can do this. I can work with this. I can understand who I am, where I've been, and then tell the story of who I'm becoming, who I want to be, really creating that future. And with visualization, I believe, and I sense you do too, Dr. Courtney, in the power of visualization to really sit in meditation and feel in your body what it will be like when you have, like, I dreamed of being an author, a published author. Like, how would she order her coffee at the coffee shop? Like, just really feeling in my body that accomplishment of having a book out, coming on interviews. Like, it like made me feel so excited to become that person that I wasn't yet as I was writing for 3.5 years. But I knew if I stuck with this process, I will become that which I desire. And it's true for anything that we desire. So I'm not sure that's a question you asked, but I feel like it fits
Yeah,
with
it does fit. And so it's so fitting that I love that the fact that you're talking about the dynamics of visualization, because it's living in that moment, being
Mhm.
aligned as it relates to that moment. And so I love that you shared the value of, hey, being an author. What will an author, what would they order from
Yeah.
my favorite place, Starbucks? Um,
Yes.
what does that look like, right? But I love that you are having the person truly visualize it. So for those individuals who are listening who may not understand how to begin the whole visualization process, where would you tell them to start?
I would tell them to start to even write down some of the things you aspire to do, to be, to experience. It does not matter how unrealistic they might feel or seem in the moment, because we can take baby steps towards those dreams and desires. But you've heard it said, it's been written, Neville Goddard speaks about it, living from the end of your vision. What will it feel like to get married? To stand there at the altar with your beloved, like to really close your eyes. And if that feels too much, like if you can't capture it, and you'll know pretty immediately if that feels too far away, what will it feel like to even meet someone, that it's like, oh, like, are they the one, to feel that excitement about partnership, about relationship. So it has to be believable to where you can really start, like your heart starts pumping and you feel the tingly feelings, and just close your eyes and sit there for a few minutes each day or several times a week. And even you can write from that place. Thank you that I am now living. Again, it has to feel really believable. I appreciate that I have met this person or that this book has been published, to really sit in the delight of your accomplishment. And from that place, you'll open your eyes, you'll go about your day, and things will start happening in your life for that to become real for you. Like for me, the literary agent came through a women's conference I attended, not even looking for one at that point. And, editors, she put me in touch with editors to help me. So doors will start opening that you didn't know were accessible when you take time to visualize. And you speak a lot about alignment, Dr. Courtney, and that's a really important piece of this whole equation, aligning with your vision emotionally, cognitively. I wonder if you could say more about that.
Well, it's interesting that what you're sharing, because I love the fact of it's interesting because I was interviewed from a young woman years ago that I actually met at International Positive Psychology Association, and she's written a great book as it relates to speaking. But before she wrote the book, she was blogging a lot, and she interviewed me in this piece, and she says, "How do you successfully present information?" And I said, "I actually visualize myself before I even hit the stage."
Yes.
Right? Like, I have a speaking engagement on Friday. I'm already thinking about all the smiles I'm going to see on Zoom. I'm already thinking about, how it's going to make me feel.
Yes.
I'm thinking about how I will make them feel, right? I'm already visualizing my messaging. I already have this great quote that's in my head. I'm like,
Yes.
yes, that quote, I'm going to do it, right? And I look forward to sharing our conversation, and I've talked to so many different incredible speakers over the past just 48 hours on top of the past year that I've had this podcast. And so even that visualization, what I love so much about what you shared, and for those who are listening, you hear me now going to the present, but then I'm also savoring the
Yes.
moment,
Yes.
right? And it speaks to so
That's
much.
it.
You're right, in terms of bringing back all of these great positive emotions of like, wow, I can't wait to see all these great smiles, or wow, opposed to having negative thoughts of going, oh gosh, that speech on Friday, and kind of operating on a level of fear, and not
Right.
operating in terms of a level of all things are possible and positivity and
Yes.
alignment. So I love that what you shared in terms of that. And I also love the fact that you talk about the full moon. So it's interesting. I was telling telling Lisa, I say, yeah, I was telling my therapist about this interview, because one thing about like I make it very, very, very public, the value and the importance of therapy. Like, I think
Yes.
we talk about going to a dentist, or we talk about going to our primary care, and just like we have all of these incredible people that make up our health team, I believe in making sure I have a great therapist. And I have
Yes.
had so many great therapists. And the one that I have currently here in the Charlotte area, what I love so much about her is that she's brought in something very new, where she talks about astrology, and she'll talk
Mm.
about the full moon. And I go,
Wow.
wow. And and she has areas in terms of positive psychology. And what I love so much about that process is that, to me, it allows us to be very open to really the universe and the
Yes.
value of really, I love this in terms of letting go.
Yes. And the full moon is a beautiful time to let go, to release beliefs that don't serve you, habits, if there are particular habits you want to start addressing, but it's more in the thought form, like I hear you talking about, which is so important. Everything originates in our mind when you really think about it. Before we live any experience, there is a seed of it in our thought. And whether or not you're aware, our thoughts carry frequency, that frequency that's measurable in the unit of hertz. And a happy thought, an optimistic thought, a hopeful thought has a higher resonance, a higher frequency than a thought of depression or violence or anger. And that's why it's really important to be aware of our thoughts. And I talk in my book how we think up to 70,000 thoughts per day. And while there's no
Wow.
way to capture all of those, if you just capture one or two a day that you notice you feel bad, what was I just thinking? Even that it's like your speaking event, like, oh, I'm nervous. I don't know if I'm going to do well. And release that. I release fearing not doing well, and I embrace reaching people, connecting with people. And then what do I need to do to really be in that state? And it's preparation. Like I hear you saying, you're prepared. And when you're prepared, we can have confidence that we'll do our very best. And so I encourage you each day to go through, try to be mindful of your thoughts and releasing negative thoughts, replacing them with what you want to believe can be true for you instead. And then even carrying those positive affirmations around in your purse, in your inside of your medicine cabinet, in your bathroom. I have that. Like I ask, I allow, I receive these powerful statements. I am healthy, wealthy, magnificent, these things that we just don't hear enough of outside in the world, but that's okay. You can self affirm. It's just as powerful and meaningful.
I love that in terms of really trying to self-affirming, right? Because the those two words, I am,
Yeah.
are powerful.
Yes.
You know, share with our audience the power behind those words, because I am, and then it's opposed to saying I, because you could say I am anything, but it
Yes.
matters what you're saying, right?
It
And
does. It does, Dr. Courtney. And I don't know that people realize our words are so powerful. Our words are our thoughts wrapped in clothing. I read from a book, Ernest Holmes, I believe it is, who's a forefather with Neville Goddard of the science of mind and this literature. Einstein was a practitioner, knowing the power of our words, of our thoughts. They reveal what we believe to be true. And I am, going back to the Bible, is a powerful statement. Whatever you put after it is what you become, with repetitive thought paired with emotion. And so you can really use that as a tool in your life. Who do you want to be? I am. And then start filling in those blanks with who you really want to become, and then taking the inspired action that will come to you as a result of fulfilling that vision for yourself.
I love that in terms of understanding the vision, because one of the things that I also really treasure in your book, you talk about boundaries,
Mhm.
right? I often say, boundaries are our besties.
Mm, yes.
That's my saying as it relates to boundaries. But why are boundaries so important in the process of healing?
It's a good question again, Dr. Courtney. And I think for myself, I was taught, much like forgiveness, this is for other people instead of myself. I used to think boundaries, it's like you just have to go tell everyone where they can't cross. Like you have to kind of be a bitch, and like stand up for yourself. And I've learned boundaries aren't necessarily that at all. A boundary can be an internal line that, and I've learned for a lot of us, boundaries are, we have to boundary ourselves, so to speak, with not thinking a negative thought, not going back to that old story and feeling disempowered. When it comes up in memory, push against it, set a boundary with that thought, and instead reaffirm, no, I'm moving in this direction to have higher self-esteem, to be a happier person. And then what does that take? So the boundaries might often be, I'm not going to go back to that relationship or go to that place. I talk in my book about healing from drug addiction. And for me, it was boundarying myself, not going to certain places that would trigger me to want to use drugs. There's no need to self harm like that anymore. Finding new places to go to that inspired me, that took my attention away from self medicating pain to truly healing and transforming it into like speaking about it and being honest and authentic, because so many people harbor a lot of shame around the things they've done that they feel are mistakes. When again, like you said, we grow through things. I believe that as well, that even habits and behaviors that caused you pain help you grow and actually develop more empathy for yourself and others if you allow them to.
I love that because I love that you're talking about the value in terms of boundaries, kind of externally, right? In terms of those dynamics, but then internally, like, no, I'm going to choose a different thought,
Yes.
or we're going in a different direction. That is so, so powerful in regards to the whole process as it relates, to the healing process. And so earlier, when you were talking about self-forgiveness, and we kind of started hinting on that, right? In terms of
Right.
the value of self-forgiveness. Talk about, what are some things that an individual can do? Because self-forgiveness in itself can be challenging.
It can be.
For a person, and I say this because on a personal note, I am a widow and I am divorced, and my first husband died suddenly because of unfortunately his business partner and friend, and this story made the news, which is so interesting because was a reporter and the
Yes.
story was making the news. They did a mock robbery, excuse me, because they were preparing if someone were to break into the store. He didn't realize the gun was fully loaded, shot my late husband, and I believe it was in the face, and died instantly at the store. And it's interesting. It's so interesting that when I shared the story, because it was 20 years ago, and
Yeah.
I even noticed how my memory is not the way it used to be. Like 20 years ago, I could say so many different details of the story.
Yes.
And so now here we are 20 years later, and actually I'm about to be featured in a magazine in the UK over this over the loss of him, but then finding love
Yes.
again with my amazing fiance, who
Yes.
I love smiling every time I say his name.
I see
And
that.
so, he's incredible. He's an incredible guy. And but I say all that to say is that, many people will ask me, well, oh my gosh, the friend that shot him, do you hate him, or do you, they'll ask me all these things, and I go, no, I don't hate anyone.
Yeah.
How is that possible? And I go, I forgive him.
Mm.
And they don't realize, because it's interesting, when I initially went through the loss of my late spouse, I was 25 at the time. We're only
Okay.
married 83 days,
Oh,
Lisa. And so when I remember, initially when it happened, I believe I was at the funeral, and a young woman approached me who knew more of him than really knew of me. And she
mm-hmm.
says, gosh, I hope this doesn't make you a bitter person. And it's so
Mm.
funny, I thought, oh my, back then I was so young, I was like, oh, what does she mean, but I
Yeah.
realized that wasn't me. That might have been levels of projection, but then
Right.
also, I realized how I never processed it that way. I always looked
Mhm.
at it as it making me a better person, allowing me to understand more meaning in my life. When initially, when I found out about the death, and I'm looking in my in-laws mirror at the time in their bedroom, just finding out about the death, I remember looking in the mirror saying, this is going to make me stronger, even though
Mm.
I had just found out. And
Yes.
so it doesn't mean that life wasn't messy and I wasn't suffering, and I went through a great deal of suffering and grieving, but I think I got so much power in my life because of forgiveness. And
Dr.
so,
Courtney, wow, this story is so powerful. I appreciate you sharing it. Keep going.
well,
Yes.
well, thank you. Well, I love sharing it with you because I love the fact that you're allowing us not to simply see it as looking at another individual, that in many cases, right, if I were to look back on that moment, maybe, if I say, oh gosh, if I called him that day, maybe something different would have
Mm.
happened, right? And by the way, the day he died was my mother's first chemo treatment. So it was a busy
Wow.
day. It was
Yes. It
to
was a
say,
big day.
it was a big day, in terms of a lot of different dynamics. But, but forgiveness, I tell people that forgiveness allows me to live in the now and allows me to have the life I have as a happiness scholar and now with an incredible man. So, forgiveness is so powerful, but it can be challenging for a person as relates to where to start. So where would you recommend in terms of, that person that's listening that's saying, wow, I can't imagine even forgiving someone who's done something like that to me. And I can't even imagine forgiving myself.
Well, I think your story beautifully illustrates that even in your deep and profound loss, which I am so sorry for your
Oh,
loss
thank
that
you,
you
Lisa.
experienced, yes, that you were able in that moment to start to even reach for making meaning, for knowing that this is going to make me stronger. I suspect a part of you is like, I don't know how or when, but like, I'm not going to let this harden my heart, close me to love. And here you've manifested a beautiful new love and still can hold and cherish your previous husband in this light, and even the friend who killed him that day, and just your desire and your reaching for making meaning of something, I think is the key to forgiveness. And even if you don't know exactly what that's going to look like or sound like, just being open to that is key. Being open, willing to see things differently. A Course in Miracles talks about a text, which is a beautiful mind training. I see you nodding your head, shifting from fear to love, just being
Yes.
willing to see something differently. And it sounds like you were somehow in that space, even with this news about your life changing in that very moment, unexpectedly. And forgiveness, I think, as well, is a progressive thing. It's usually not a blanket one time experience. There are layers and levels of forgiveness. I don't know if that was your experience going through this experience that you had, but it's like with the awareness I have, I can forgive even myself for whatever it may be, going through the layers of judgments we harbor against ourselves that then is naturally reflected and projected onto others, and taking the time to be with those parts of ourselves. I kind of walk you through that in my book and share some of my experiences of realizing that there's a gift to be had in just slowing down. Even in knowing this process might take a while, I believe forgiveness is lifelong. We're never beyond the act of forgiving. And so to use it as a practice, much like gratitude, you hear a lot about appreciating, being grateful for what you have, even forgiveness each day. Is there something I've done today or thought today that maybe hurt my feelings or someone else's that I need to forgive? And daily come to this practice.
Absolutely. I love that in terms of looking at forgiveness. I never thought of it that way in terms of
Thank
looking.
you.
Yeah, I love that in terms of looking at forgiveness in terms of how we see gratitude,
Yeah.
right? Because I talk about gratitude a lot, Lisa.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I love gratitude. You actually behind me is a couple of gratitude jars.
Yes.
One made by my fiance when we were in a
Beautiful.
long distance relationship. So I treasure gratitude, but I never looked at it in terms of the dynamics of that as it relates to forgiveness and thinking
Yes.
about the level of progress, right? And the layers as it relates to
Yes.
forgiveness. And I think that speaks so much to healing because sometimes, 'cause especially in the world that we live in, we can get so many things instantly. I can get on my phone, I can look on my app, I can go, I can look at Amazon and have something delivered here in 2 hours.
Yes.
Right? We're so used to having things quickly.
Instant gratification.
Absolutely. But forgiveness and practicing may not be something that is like that
They're
snap.
cultivated, much like I think
Yes,
happiness and gratitude. These are cultivated practices and experiences that then you can feel more and more into quite naturally as you cultivate those those tendencies and that choice. Going back to choice.
absolutely. And it's interesting you talk about choice, right? Because I think that allows us to understand how we can get our power back.
Yes, I was just thinking that, Dr. Courtney. It shifts us from disempowerment to
Yes.
empowerment.
Yes, it does. And I love that you allow us to understand how powerful we are. One thing I love so much about your book was looking at all these different dynamics of really feeling transformative but empowered. And
Yes.
your book really, really speaks to that. I'm so curious because
Yeah.
I know one of the things I love about all the things as relates to Lisa is the work that she's done in her book, her podcasts, and then the other podcasts that she's been on, and also the her articles that are really blooming in terms of this world, in terms of really empowering people. What is a transformative story that, a person that you've met within your community that has, kind of gone through either your principles or and they have literally have felt this life-changing moment?
A client that I care about so much, she has been using my book to help to heal from the loss of a relationship, a breakup that was very challenging for her, as I think for many of us. Breakups are, I think, one of the hardest things to go through because it's somebody you loved that you shared such intimacy and time with, and for various reasons that ends or changes. And especially when you don't want a relationship to end and it does, it can really, we can feel deeply disempowered. And for this individual, she was able to take, even if it's just 2% of responsibility. In this situation, the greater responsibility was with the partner, and he didn't take responsibility, and that leaves us with this jarring sense of like a wet blanket over your head. Like you can't breathe, you don't know what happens, like how did I let this happen? But to even look at your 2%, if it's that small, that maybe there were some things, I let slide, that I might didn't speak up about because I'm being so understanding of this other person, where instead maybe I need to be a little less self-boundaried and call the person to the carpet. Hey, like this doesn't sit well with me. And she was able to go through some of those memories and make some meaning, like not that she's a bad person or did anything wrong, but in the future, if I feel this red flag or pink flag emotion, I'm going to speak up about it instead of just kind of overlook it. And so in these ways, she was able to transform from feeling really at fault and abandoned to, hey, no, like I'm learning some skills. This partner wouldn't take up, a week of space today in my life, being the woman I am today. So I think that's what it's, about, like our transformation and standing in our power authentically.
Absolutely. I love that, after going through actually really doing the work, right? In
Yeah.
terms of your book, because that's where the work comes into play when you start to go do the journey, and literally get on the other side of that because of the work that you've done throughout the healing process, right? And I love the fact that now, as she reflects back, she's like, I wouldn't spend, a day or, or
Right.
I even this person doesn't deserve to be, in my
Yes.
space. And that really speaks to so much power,
Yeah.
because then everything has literally has shifted along the way. You
Her
know,
vision has changed of life, the lens she's looking through.
it's interesting when you talk about vision. Do you think a big part of that vision has to do with uh us kind of grieving what we thought would be? It's ki-
Mm. Can you say that again in a
y-
different way, Dr. Courtney?
so when we're going through the whole vision, right? So we
Mm.
have a new vision of our life, right?
Okay.
That new
Yes.
vision. But then when we are thinking back on what we thought would happen,
Yeah.
do you consider that levels of us kind of grieving the life that we thought,
Sure.
and kind of now going through the life of this new vision for ourselves, which can be challenging because you're kind of grieving as relates
Yes.
to what could have been.
It's a lot of emotions happening at once in the scenario that you're presenting. And I think, again, it's in our perspective and being willing to see this differently, being willing to suspend our judgment, which is causing us pain, that this is the wrong thing that happened. This wasn't supposed to happen. Instead of what if this is actually what needs to happen to get you to what you really want, like to your happiness. It just might look messed up. It just might look like it's wrong in air quotes, but it's actually, the path can be circuitous to our dreams and desires. And to really just hold on to yourself and ask to be shown more, to be shown that this actually is my path. This is going to get me to my happiness. And it's actually the right thing, not the wrong thing. and that can be transformative.
Absolutely. I love that in terms of really embracing this new path.
Hmm.
And also, well, really actually the path in essence, because all of it is teaching us lessons along the way, right? And
Yeah.
and bringing us into having this this walk as relates to our journey. I'm also
Yes.
curious about this because I really believe that so much of empathy.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because even as a professor, I often tell students, especially being a professor during the pandemic,
Yeah.
and I tell students all the time, I said, you know what, empathy is so important. So it's me understanding all the dynamics and the stresses that they're going through,
Hmm.
right? But then it's also all of us being empathetic towards each other, valuing the fact that we're all dealing with so many different dynamics as relates to the pandemic. And it's interesting
Yes,
because I just think empathy is a superpower,
I do
right?
too.
It's so important. How can a person, begin to really practice empathy, and how can self-compassion help them along the way?
Sure. Both empathy and self compassion are mind positioning. It's a position within your mind, within your heart. And sometimes it doesn't mean you need to necessarily say something or become a doormat, which is a misnomer that being compassionate and empathetic means you'll be taken advantage of. Quite contrary, it's a positioning where you're able to extend in your mind, the offering of seeing people through the lens of standing in their own shoes as much as you're able. And it might mean you take a step back, you take several steps back because you really don't enjoy how being around them feels some of the time. And you don't need to correct them or blast them, but just step away and be open to other people, places, and things. And kind of living compassionately is really about how do you give from your overflow. What really makes you the happiest as you look at your to-do list for the day, even what's going to light me up to start with, for example, and going about your work and your relationships from more of a place of upliftment, if that makes sense, versus it being hard or challenging or like, oh, I have to deal with that person. Like maybe you don't. If you kind of compassionately step back, let them go through whatever they are. And usually I found people kind of come back with some time. If you give them some time to just be with themselves and their own processes, like, is that speaking to you at all, or this question, Dr.
It
Courtney?
does.
Okay.
I love the fact that you're talking about giving from your overflow.
Yeah.
And because that's so important, is thinking about who's pouring into you, or what
Yes.
you're doing to pour into yourself. and
Yes.
and not I have a mentor that would always remind me, of that saying, which is give from your saucer, not your cup, right?
Oh,
You
okay.
which is
Yes.
giving from your overflow and not
Yeah.
from like, hello, there's the cup and it's like
Yes.
empty. It's like,
Yes.
wait a minute, it's kind of shallow there or empty there, right? So I
Yeah.
love that in terms of really valuing the importance of what you need to do to kind of nurture you,
Yeah.
and then kind of giving, in terms of, really giving elements of yourself to the world, but you're not doing it based on a level of depletion, but you're doing it based on a level of abundance.
Exactly. And I think it's really important now, Dr. Courtney, going, in this pandemic era where there have been so many changes and really having to look at your life differently, approach things differently, that you might need some more time to yourself, or sort of really pay attention to what your overflow looks like, how you receive it, how you like to give it to others, and really honoring and respecting that.
I love that. And it's so interesting. This is the part of the program that I hate the most. And that is that is me wrapping it up.
Oh, yes.
I hate this because honestly, I'm really enjoying all of the great information that you're sharing, Lisa, in terms of your knowledge, your book, your experiences, and then also sharing the transformative stories of the incredible people that make up your community. So before I ask a question that I ask all guests,
Okay.
for those who are listening who are saying, well, you know what, Dr. Courtney, I hate that you're wrapping it up too. Because I'm enjoying listening to Lisa and all of her amazing brilliance. Where can they find you?
Sure. The best place is through my website, nolatherapy.com. It stands for New Orleans, Los Angeles Therapy.com, as well as on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. I am at Nola Therapy. I'd love to connect with your audience. And Dr. Courtney, I would love to have you on my All Things Therapy podcast as my guest, because this conversation is awesome and your energy is just beautiful. And I would love to highlight more about your perspective and paradigms on life.
Well, I am now so even more excited, which I found that hard to believe that I could even get even more excited. Because, you know, I like I said, I wear it and I have just been so excited about talking with you. And I am so grateful. I look forward to being on your podcast too.
Awesome.
And one of the things about the Kourting Happiness podcast is all about how one can commit to their well-being, their happiness journey. And I ask everyone that joins us in our studio, I ask them this question, and that is, what do you do to commit to your courting or your happiness journey?
The one thing that comes to mind immediately is that I have a meditation practice that I begin every day with, even if it's only 5 minutes in silence with my eyes closed before I check a text message or an email. It is that time with spirit, with my inner being, to just say thank you for a new day. And I ask for it to be really the best day of my life and to just guide me, inform me, bless me so that I can bless others. And that's what I do every morning before I start any kind of anything, is just this time in meditation. And I encourage listeners to try that out and see how your life transforms, see how you transform and are happier as a result.
I love that. First thing in the morning, really making sure that you're focusing inward and
Yes.
having that quiet time with yourself. Lisa, I enjoyed every second, not just minute, every second talking with you. I felt that we had this incredible conversation.
Me too. Yes.
And I am just in awe of all the great work that you're doing. Thank you so much for all your contributions in terms of the industry, in terms of psychology, and also as it relates to helping us all transform our lives. You are extraordinary.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Courtney, as are you. Many blessings to you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You can learn more about where to follow Lisa Tahir by visiting her episode page on the Kourting Happiness podcast website at drcourtneyalston.com/podcast/episode 60. And you can purchase her book in the Kourting Happiness library. Let's continue this conversation online. Email us at podcast@drcourtneyalston.com. That's podcast@drcourtneyalston.com. Join us on Instagram at Kourting Happiness. Don't forget, that's courting with a K. Also, I hope you join our private Facebook community. You can find us at Kourting Happiness Podcast Community. Our private Facebook group is a safe haven to share, meet more people looking to build positive relationships, focus on well-being, and create a happier life. Now, are you ready to spread happiness? We hope you subscribe and share this podcast with your family, friends, coworkers, and all the important people in your world. We release a new episode every Thursday. Congratulations on your continued commitment to your courting happiness journey. Thank you so much for listening. We want you to be well, be happier, and be kinder to yourself. We can't wait to see you next week.